Today we're going to assemble an E-Ride Pro SS 2.0. Here are the tools that we used for the assembly of the E-Ride Pro SS 2.0. These are the tools that came in the kit. Some of these tools are going to be what we use, some are in addition to. First we had a knife and some snips to open up the crate and to get all the zip ties undone around the packaging. We had a 13mm deep socket for the rear shock bolt, a 10mm deep socket to drive out the front axle pin. We had blue Loctite. You can either use a liquid form or this is a gel, like a glue stick. This works really well. It's nice and clean, easy to use. You need an 8mm Allen, 6mm Allen, 5mm Allen, 4mm Allen, some ratchets. These are 3/8 drive, whatever you use with your driven Allen keys. Dielectric grease for all of the electrical connections. 2.5mm Allen key, a 3mm Allen key. Those are for fixtures on the handlebars. 17mm wrench for the foot peg nut, and a hammer to drive out the front axle pin. We also need all-purpose bearing grease for components on the bike, and then some brake clean for the rotors and to clean off the threads on the bolts before you install lock. Here are the parts that came in the box that we're going to need to assemble. You have your instruction manual, a 10-amp charger. This is what charges the battery for the bike. You have the front wheel with the hub spacers. You got your toolkit that came with the bike. We probably won't use this, but if you need these tools, they are included. There's a 17mm, 13mm wrench, and then some miscellaneous sizes of Allen keys. Pack of zip ties, your front faceplate, your LCD display. This tells you all the information for the bike. Front fender, rear fender and chain guard on one side, and then left and right foot pegs. The first thing we'd recommend that you do is to get the battery charging so that when you're done assembling you can ride the bike. So when the bike's in the box, it comes with the keys in the ignition. Take the keys out, and then you got to lock on the right hand side for the battery door. So if you turn this counterclockwise, open that up, this is the battery here. So you got a couple different ports, and we're going to get this battery pulled out, get it hooked up on the charger, and show you how to do that next. The battery has a couple different ports on the side. You've got one port here that has a 4-prong plug, and you've got another port here on this side that's a 4-prong plug. The side that you plug the charger into is on this side. And with the charger, you want to make sure that you do the connection to the battery first and then plug it into the wall second. And when the charger turns on, this fan will start going and you'll know it's charging. So this is a 10-amp charger. It should charge it fairly quickly. We'll let this charge as we're doing our video of the assembly, and then when we're done we'll put the battery back in the bike. All of the bolts that we're going to install in this video will have this process done on them. So get a little brake clean on your rag, back the threads of the bolt out, clean them off with brake clean, get all the assembly oil off of them, and then once you've done that, you take your bolt and wipe it through this Loctite, one on each side, and that's the process. That'll keep the bolts from coming out with vibrations. The next thing we're going to work on is the handlebar clamp. We're going to remove these 4 bolts. They are a 5mm Allen key. With a 3mm Allen key, first thing we're going to install on the handlebars is the on and off switch for the headlight. We're going to have the switch on the bottom side of the bars, and this needs to be installed before you put the bars in the clamp because this line is too short to install it otherwise. So we'll back this out so that the clamp is loose. We've taken this out and put Loctite on it already. Turn the bars so that they're the right way. Slide this switch on. So we have the switch in place. We're going to leave it loose so that we can get the grip and the brake lever and everything put in place and in the right spot. So leave that loose for now. Next thing is we're going to put the clamp in place over top of the bars. We're going to take our 5mm bolts that we removed. If you look at the bars, you can see that there's these this graph here. The way that I did it was I tried to center the plus signs in between the clamp, and then I just did these up loose until we get to the final steps, and then we will finish tighten them at that point so that you can adjust the rotation of the bars to your liking. With a 4mm Allen key, we're going to loosen these two clamp bolts for the right hand brake lever, and we're going to install that on the handlebar. So just like the on and off switch for the headlight, we're just going to tighten these bolts down just snug. We're not going to tighten them all the way tight so that we can adjust the brake lever angle to your hand the way that you would like it. That'll be one of our final steps. The left hand brake lever is already pre-assembled on the handlebars. We remove these two bolts, clean them, and put Loctite on them and put them back in loose. Next step is to install the LCD readout, the screen. We're going to remove the two mounting bolts. They're a 3mm head. Put some Loctite on those. The clamp that holds it in place has two nuts that are stuck inside the clamp. We're also going to install some dielectric grease on all of the electrical connections of the whole bike. This will keep water from getting in and having dirt and things get inside the connections. Okay, so the clamp needs to be spread apart and stretched over top of the handlebars. And then reinstall the two bolts snug. And then we will final tighten those once we sit on the bike and adjust where we like the angle of the screen. And if you look at the orientation of the mount, this is the way you want to put it on with the three buttons on the right hand side. After you've put the dielectric grease in the connector, if you can see there's an arrow on both ends of this connector between the screen and the harness on the bike. You need to line those arrows up and push them together, and then wipe off the excess dielectric grease. And once you've wiped that off, the next step is going to be to clamp this line in this clamp on the fork clamp. With the 2.5mm Allen key, we're going to undo this small bolt holding this line clamp onto the fork clamp, and then we'll put the LCD screen line through this clamp and then reattach this bolt. Next step is to install the hand grip throttle. You have two 4mm bolts. We need to just loosen these enough that you can slide it over the end of the handlebar and install the whole grip. One thing to be very careful of is not to put any tension on this throttle cable line. You don't want to pull that out of the hand grip. So once that clamp is loose, carefully slide this over the end of the handlebar. Slide it on until it stops, and then back it up just a hair, and then loosely tighten these clamp bolts down. The next step is to get the shock set up in its mount. The first thing we're going to do is remove this bolt. As you remove this bolt, be careful of the bushing that it goes through. The bushing is a two-part bushing, so don't lose these pieces. We're going to remove these and grease these so that they don't squeak when you ride the bike. Once the bushings are greased, we're going to need to reinstall the bolt. Lift up on the seat of the bike. Slide the bolt through. And with a 6mm hex and a 13mm deep socket, we'll go ahead and tighten up this bolt. Next step is to undo the fork compression straps. Be careful not to pinch your fingers in these, they're pretty loaded. Next step is to undo the axle pin in the bottom of the forks, and then these 4 bolts need to be removed and Loctited. With a 6mm Allen key, we need to back this cap out of the axle pin. This is left-handed thread. Once you've removed that cap, the next step, we found a 10mm socket that fits pretty good. Fit that down inside the recess here of the axle pin, and then with a rubber mallet, drive the pin out towards the left-hand side of the bike. Once you've got the pin out as far as you can with the socket, you can take an 8mm Allen key and rotate it while you pull on it, and it should come the rest of the way out. I'm going to support the fork as you finish off the pin so that it doesn't fall. Now that we've got the rear shock hooked up and the front forks undone from the block on the skid, the next part is to put it on a stand. You can either use a real motocross style stand or a 5-gallon bucket or something that you can use to get the front forks up off the ground so that we can install the front tire. This is also one of the reasons we removed the battery. It makes the bike a lot lighter to be able to do that step. With a 5mm Allen key, you're going to need to remove the 2 caliper mounting bolts. Hold on. With some brake clean, spray your rag and wipe off the faces of your rotor where the pads are going to touch. This will make sure that you don't have any oil on the rotor when you first ride. Front and back side both. Once you got the rotor clean, you need to take your axle bushings, and on the outside there's this rubber O-ring. You want to take some of your grease and rub some grease around the outside of that O-ring so that when you slide it into place, that O-ring doesn't get nicked. And you slide this axle bushing into place, wipe off the excess, and you do that same step on both sides. Next step installing the front tire is we're going to put a little bit of grease on our axle pin just to light them out so that it slides through. And then being careful not to knock off these bushings that we installed with the O-rings previously. We set this up in the fork. And we're going to reinstall the axle pin the same way it came out of the skid. Okay, with our 6mm Allen key on our cap, we're going to install, and remember this is left-handed threads, we're going to install this cap into the axle pin. We've put Loctite on those threads. We're going to back up the other side and hold it stationary with an 8mm Allen key. Tighten that key. The next step is to install the 4 front clamp bolts into the front forks. These are a 5mm Allen key. We've Loctited these threads. From the factory, they have this caliper pad spacer clip in here. This is so that if you accidentally press the brake lever, it doesn't eject the pistons out of the caliper body. So you need to remove this clip, slide the caliper over the rotor, and then with a 5mm Allen key, we're going to install the bolts back in, and we're only going to do these hand tight, just snug, so that we can ensure that when we tighten them up, the caliper is centered over the top of the rotor so you don't have it rubbing on the pads. If you're doing this by yourself, this could be a good trick for you. We need to set up the caliper on the rotor on the front fork. Those bolts are loose. And to be able to center the caliper, you need to be able to compress this brake lever and have it hold the brake caliper. So a way to get around having to have 2 people is if you take 2 of the zip ties that came in the kit, put them together, you can use the zip ties to hold that lever tight. And while that's being held, you can come back down to the caliper, tighten up these 2 caliper mounting bolts with your 5mm again. Final tighten these. And then go back up to the handlebars and clip those zip ties. Once you've removed the zip ties, you can do a test on your front wheel. You can see that as it spins, it's not rubbing, and the brakes stop it. And then we're going to repeat this process for the rear. The next step is going to be to take the bike off of the stand, and we're going to use the kickstand now to install the foot pegs. We're going to do this on the left-hand side of the bike. The process is the same for both sides. If you look at the mount that the peg goes into, you have these 2 set screws. Those line up with 2 of the holes inside this mount so that it can't twist. You're going to take the nut off, put the stem through the hole, and rotate it until those set screws line up with the holes in the mount. And before you tighten the nut, you're going to want to make sure that you put the correct peg on each side. You want it to be able to bend backwards in case you were to come in contact with something that will bend backwards and be relieved. So once you slide that through, you take the nut on the back side of the stud, thread that in place, and then with a 17mm wrench, you're going to want to tighten up the nut on the back side of the peg. Some of the final processes is going to be setting the bars. This is why we left the bolts loose. You can rotate the bars forward and backwards to your liking, how you feel your rider position feels best. Once you get that set, ensure that it's centered inside the clamp. You can see this line here. That should be centered in the center of the clamp, and you can see the plus signs on each side. Once you get that set with a 5mm Allen, go ahead and final tighten these bolts, and that will clamp the bars in place. With your bars set the way that you want them, the next step is going to be to adjust the angle and height of your brake levers and also the twist of your throttle the way that feels best to you for your throttle. This is why we left the bolts loose at the first of the video. So set those, get them snug, and then go through and final tighten them. The brake lever bolts are 4mm, as well as the bolts for the throttle housing. Now we're going to adjust our headlight switch and tighten it up with a 3mm Allen key. Find where that feels good for you and tighten up the bolt. Last step on the handlebars is going to be to adjust the display. This is also a 3mm Allen key. When that angle feels good to you, tighten up the last 2 clamp bolts. Next step is to adjust the slack in this front brake line. So we're going to remove this bolt here with a 2.5mm Allen key. Remove it from the clamp. Slide the clamp around the brake line. Apply some Loctite. And then reinstall this loosely into the hole, and then we'll adjust the line in the clamp. So the reason we need to adjust the line in the clamp is so that when the front forks compress and you get slack in this, that it doesn't come in and contact the tire. So we want to pull this tight in the clamp as you tighten down this bolt with your 2.5mm hex. Next up is to install the front fender onto the bottom side of your fork clamp. There's 3 bolts that hold that in place. They're 4mm head, and they come inside this baggie, this parts baggie that comes in one of the boxes in the crate. So we're going to Loctite these, and they go through the bottom side of the fender. And if you look, there's a shoulder on this screw that matches the inside diameter of this hole. All 3 of those come in from the bottom side and thread into threaded holes in the bottom of the clamp right there. The next step is to install the rear fender and chain guard. The longer side, you can see the shorter side, longer side. Longer side goes on the right hand side of the bike. We need to remove the pre-installed bolts here, 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 and here. We're going to get those taken out, put some Loctite on them, and then we'll show you how to install the fender. It doesn't seem like it's going to fit. On the first bike we did, we kind of had some troubles with this, trying to figure out why. But you have to stretch the fender out and put it on the outside of the tabs. So once you've got that stretched over, the forward bolt on the left-hand side has this clamp for your brake line. Before you ride the bike, it's probably a good idea, since this was shipped, to verify your tire pressure. 25 to 32, 33 PSI is where you should have the tires inflated to. Installing the faceplate, you can route all of the wires behind the light. You have kind of a clamp that goes around the fork. Then with the supplied zip ties in the crate, go through the slot, tighten the zip tie, and you would do that on all 4. Now that we have everything on the outside of the bike done, the next and final step is going to be to install the battery, and we want to prep the bike for putting the battery in. This is the main battery plug here. You have your positive and negative side and your connectors. Something that we want to do here is put some dielectric grease on all the connectors, keep everything free of water and debris. Inside the battery box of the bike is the breaker switch. And you can see you can toggle that left and right. Right here on the breaker, there's a window, and it'll either be green or red. Green is off, red is on. To flip to the left is off, flip to the right is on. So we're going to leave that in the off position until we get the battery in the box and plugged in and all set up, ready to go. From the factory, inside the battery box is also this white plug with a loop. This is a limiter. So to get full potential out of the bike at full speed, you depress this piece of this connector and separate the two halves. If you're going to have younger kids ride it, it's probably a good idea to leave this in place so that it can't go quite as fast. Once the fan on the charger has shut off and you push the button on the top of the battery and all of the indicator lights are solid green, that means that this is charged. To undo the battery, you want to undo the charger from the wall first, disconnect the AC power, and then come down to the battery and disconnect the charger side of the charger on the battery, and then reinstall the rubber plug onto the charger port, and then we'll take this battery into the bike and get it set up. We're going to take these cords and tuck them up over top of your breaker, get them out of the way so that the slot for the battery to slide down in is free and clear. The battery will install with the orange plug for the positive and negative cables facing the right side of the bike, and the strap to pull the battery out of the bike is facing the rear of the bike. Slide that down in, verify that the bottom of the battery is down in the battery tray. Pull your connectors back out. The first one to hook up here is a 4-prong. This one installs with this lever face up. Push that on till it clicks. Pull on it, make sure it's tight. The next one's going to be your battery. Make sure that the key is not on and that the bike is turned off and that the breaker is also turned off. Install the battery plug. Make sure that it's installed all the way. And then to power on the bike, you need to flip the breaker to the right. That will send power through the bike. Turn the key to the on position. We should be ready to ride with 100% battery. Everything's good. Verify all your brakes are working. Make sure your throttle's not sticking. Go ahead and slowly take off and give her a test.